محمد وآل محمد.
ثانية غفر الله لكم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
ثالثة على حب المولى أبي عبد الله الحسين بأعلى أصواتكم.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. In the name of Allah, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon our beloved Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. And may God's peace and blessings be upon our beloved Imam al-Hussein and his family members and his companions. To recap from where we left off yesterday, very quickly, we said that when we look at the events that took place in Karbala, we see that Imam al-Hussein, peace upon him, and his companions demonstrated a tremendous amount of courage and bravery. And that courage did not only manifest itself because it was a military confrontation. Of course there would be courage and bravery on a battlefield. But there was also another battle that was taking place, a psychological and ideological battle between a majority, a crushing majority, and a small minority. And yet we see that the Imam, peace upon him, and his companions did not hesitate, did not weaken. They remained with unshakable conviction. Their position remained the same until the very end. So us being in a minority situation, living in Western societies, we thought we would look at the events of Karbala and try to see what we can learn from them, at least in terms of this, the courage it takes and the determination it takes as a minority living in a crushing majority, struggling with the same nature of struggles. For instance, the ideological battles, the struggles at the doctrinal level. And in short, we said that if the Imam and his companions were able to maintain their position, it was because they knew who they were, they understood their identity, and they understood the duties that are associated with that identity. And very quickly we mentioned 3 points related to the notions of identity and duty. The first being that every human being in every instant of their life happens to be in a minority situation. The only difference is whether we put the spotlight on that specific aspect or not. Otherwise, everybody happens to be in a minority situation. The second point related to identities was that no one is only made up of one identity. We are multiple identities. Our reality is compound. All of us have different relationships with the world, and every one of these relationships involves an identity and duties associated with that identity. And that's why we said that we cannot answer the question of are we a Muslim or are we a Canadian? We're both at the same time. It's not either or. They're both at the same time, as well as other things, other identities to which duties are associated. The last point was that there's a duty to understand our identity. Identities are abstract notions. They require from us to be educated about them. They require knowledge. It requires knowledge and then education to understand what it means to have a Muslim identity, or a Canadian identity, or a Shi'i identity. So starting from that point, today we will say, no one said that maintaining that kind of identity in a minority situation is easy. It requires determination and it requires a strong will. So the starting point is knowledge. And we are trying to move from knowledge to action. Hopefully today we can cover the topic of knowledge from an Islamic perspective, so that in the next nights we can move on to the notion of action in Islam. The role of knowledge in Islam is crucial. In fact, Islam considers knowledge and the reason, which is the tool for knowledge, it considers them sacred. If we look at the books, the compendiums, the encyclopedias of sayings of Ahlul Bayt, the books of hadith, the books of narration, books like al-Kafi and al-Bihar, Tuhaf al-Uqul, they all start with the same chapter. They all start with a chapter on knowledge and on reason. Al-Bihar starts on a chapter where it's knowledge, reason, and ignorance. Al-Kafi starts with a chapter on reason and ignorance. There's a reason why these authors choose the ahadith that have to do with reason and knowledge first, before entering any other topic of religion. In Islam, everything starts from reason. You establish the rational foundation, and then you can move on to action. Action derives from reason. It derives from the knowledge. Just quickly, maybe to give you a taste, incite you to read a little bit in these books, because in fact they contain nothing but sayings of Ahlul Bayt, and it's important for us to look in them from time to time. Kitab al-Kafi is about, the versions that are available nowadays, there are about 15 volumes. It's divided into 3 parts. The first part is called Usul al-Kafi, or the foundations, and it's usually about 8 or 9 volumes, and it talks about beliefs. It talks about God and His attributes and His actions and prophets and imamah and the afterlife. The next chapters have to do with action. They have to do with prayer and fasting and performing the pilgrimage and so on and so forth. And the last volume, and sometimes 2 volumes, they're called Rawdat al-Kafi. And they basically have to do with morals and ethics. So the authors always choose the topic of knowledge and reason at the beginning to enter into Islam. When we look at the narrations, however, when we try to understand the position of knowledge and reason, we see that in one of the narrations talking about the beginning of the creation, it says that when God wanted to create the world, He started by creating reason. And then He talked to reason. He said to reason, "You are the best of my creation." And the reason is very important, because it is through you that I am worshipped. We also have a narration from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. When he's asked about reason and knowledge, he says, reason is that by which you worship the Lord and by which you have access to paradise. Basically, Islam, as much as it considers knowledge and reason important, it adds one criteria to it. The sacredness of it comes from the purpose. The purpose of knowledge and reason are to worship God better, to get a stronger relationship with the Lord. How do we get that? How do we get that stronger relationship? It is through gaining that knowledge, an education process. And the classic answer is usually study religious sciences. So you can study aqa'id, theology and doctrinal matters. You can study fiqh, Islamic law and the principles associated with it, to understand your duty in every situation in life. Your duties will fall into one of 5 categories: obligatory, strongly recommended, strongly discouraged, prohibited, and neutral. In every instance of your life, whatever you're performing, whatever you're doing, it happens to fall into one of these categories. You can study hadith. You spend time understanding the meanings and the sayings of Ahlul Bayt, of the Holy Prophet, as well as the people who narrated those sayings to us, to see how authentic they are, how trustworthy they are, and so on and so forth. The big Islamic fields. In addition to those fields, if we keep the criteria of the Imam in mind, the Imam is basically telling us anything that constitutes knowledge that can get you closer to the Lord can be considered Islamic knowledge. Which means that you can also study biology, you can also study chemistry and physics, or things that serve humanity, so long as you keep that one criteria in mind, which is it getting you closer to the Lord? If by studying the animal cell, you start discovering the might and the power and the wisdom and the mercy of God, then that becomes sacred knowledge. And that knowledge is considered Islamic. The Quran is always encouraging us not only to study the theoretical fields that are called the religious sciences, but to ponder the signs of God. And the signs of God is all of His creation, including ourselves. So let us assume that we have now covered the grounds of knowledge. Do we consider that enough? Is it enough to have knowledge, or do we need to move beyond knowledge? In Islam, knowledge is not enough. The point is not knowledge for the sake of knowledge. We have to move from knowledge to faith. And there is a difference between these notions. Knowledge does not automatically result in faith. Faith requires a commitment from the heart with regards to matters of knowledge. You can know something, it doesn't necessarily mean that you believe in it. A lot of people know that if you eat junk food, processed foods, your health is going to deteriorate. It's not good for your health. Yet, they still eat junk food. That's because the belief aspect is missing. You know, but you do not believe because you're not sick yet. Nothing makes you jump from the knowledge to the belief. You know that God is watching you at any time, and yet you can perform the sin. That's because the faith, the belief is missing. You know that God is watching. That's why in one of the narrations we have from Ahlul Bayt, when the Imam is asked, how can a believer commit a sin? The Imam replies, while committing the sin, the believer is not a believer. He's outside Iman. If you really believe, then action derives from the belief. Action may not result from knowledge. Knowledge is not enough. Knowledge is theory. Belief, you have combined your reason, your mind, and your heart. So now we move on to faith and belief. How do we gain belief and faith? This is a big topic, but to keep it very short, we'll say the main factor is that of guidance. Guidance can be internal. God has bestowed in the human being things that enable guidance. Human nature itself leans to things that are good for it and is repelled from things that it does not like, that are not good for it. God says He inspired the soul to know what is good for it, or the good and the evil. أَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. So that's an internal guidance that is already in us. But God in His infinite mercy added to that guidance external forms of guidance. He sent prophets, He sent imams, He sent holy books containing the teachings that He wants us to access. And this is an external form of guidance. There's another aspect of guidance that is usually not mentioned under the category of guidance. And that is that God also guides you by generally directing you towards something. Guidance in that sense is basically the combination, the convergence of all the causes that in the end result in an output. You, in this minute, in this instant, you happen to be sitting here listening to me talk. For that to happen, there were thousands upon thousands of causes that all had to converge and be combined together. And the manifestation, the end result, is that you are sitting here at this moment. Had you been born 1,000 years before, you would not be sitting here right now. Had you been born to a different set of parents or born in a different country, you may not be sitting here right now. Had you taken a different road to get to the building today, maybe there would have been some impediment on the way preventing you. You may have been sick, the car would not work. These are all causes. If each and every one of these thousands and millions of causes that we don't think about usually don't all converge at the same time, the output, the result, the outcome is different. Every little difference in these causes changes the world. This is mentioned under guidance because when we think about it, we realize that basically our lives are in the hands of God from every aspect. Basically, we control ourselves and our actions, but the external factors are the ones in a lot of cases that enable, that favor us to do something or not do something. It depends on our environment. It depends on what has led us to a situation before we can deal with that situation. And that's why this is a form of guidance. Our Christian brethren and friends, they often refer to this complexity of causes by saying that the Lord works in mysterious ways. We don't know all these causes. Most of the time they're completely invisible to us. We go on in our lives and all of this is happening behind the scenes to us. And yet we end up, for instance, tonight, we end up here. There's a lot of things that had to happen for us to end up here. So the next question becomes, how do we ensure that this form of guidance that we need, that these external causes that we need, always converge in our best interest so that we get more faith and we get access to that sacred knowledge? And this is again a very big topic. In very short terms, we would say, as mysterious as this is in and of itself, the Lord has actually given us the secret key to understanding what is required from us to gain access to that form of guidance. And it's a very important one. People who don't believe in religion and in God often refer to this as good luck. or fate or destiny or fortune. Who wouldn't give a lot to have better luck or better fate or better destiny? In our case, we know what we're aiming for. We're aiming for more faith. We're aiming to be better in the eyes of God. We're aiming for proximity, for closeness to God. And we want those causes and conditions to be favorable to that. So what do we have to do? In short, the Quran and the sayings of Ahl al-Bayt basically tell us one thing: you have to try. Make a step towards God. Show some struggle. Make an effort. Nothing else. Once you have the knowledge, make an effort. Every time you make an effort, the Lord will guide you further in that sense of guidance. This is what is referred to as tawfiq. This is what is referred to as all the conditions coming together for you, enabling you to actually do something about it. You don't control the external world that you live in, but you do control your actions, and God has given you that power that through your actions you can access that guidance, and you can get what is referred to as husn tawfiq. So that the tawfiq, the alignment of the conditions becomes in your favor, so that you end up with more faith, so that you end up with the sacred knowledge. This in turn will open up the doors to understanding the relationship between knowledge and belief and action. And inshallah we'll talk about that in the next nights. May God's peace and blessings be upon our beloved Imam al-Hussein and his companions and his family members, and upon our holy Prophet. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على